What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're looking at Psalm 38, 39, and 40. And it's good that we're reading these all together because they really show up as a package deal here. Because what we're going to see is a song of confession, kind of like Psalm 32 that we read a couple days ago, but the song of confession to God over sin. And then we're going to see the deliverance of what it looks like to be forgiven and saved by God in chapter 40. So as you read, you're going to notice in chapter 38 that he's going to say things like, my iniquities, my sins are high above my head. They're huge. They're like a heavy burden that are too heavy for me. I'm weighed down by these burdens of sin. Now, it's not that he's continually doing these sins. It's that he's looking back on sin and feeling the guilt of that sin. It says in verse 18, I confess my iniquity and I'm sorry for my sin. Now, there's that in chapter 38. Then in Psalm 39, this next song, it's an interesting thing. He talks about wanting to be silent in front of the wicked because what he doesn't want to do is have this conversation with them about his experience and share his heart with them because they are in a totally different place. It's interesting how this works because he sees them as the wicked people, and he says, I want to keep my mouth silent because when I complain about a hard situation or my enemies, I don't want them to say, oh yeah, I have enemies too, when in fact their enemies are the good people. So he wants to distance himself from them. And then what he says in verse 4 to 6 is, our life is like a breath before God. It's short. It says, here, make me know my end. He's talking to God here. Make me know my end and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am, how I'm just here one day and gone the next. And that's a helpful perspective to have, especially as we say in verse 7, as he turns his hope and attention towards God, saying, my hope is in you. Without God, I am nothing. I wouldn't even exist without God. Without God sustaining me, I wouldn't live for another day. So he says, let me focus and get my attention for a minute on how fleeting my life is. Super helpful, and I think important for us to do too. We need to focus for a time on how fleeting and short our lives are, and remember that our hope needs to be in God alone. Then in chapter 40, you see the deliverance of what it looks like to be forgiven. He talks about how he patiently waited for God, and God heard his cry, and God drew him up out of the pit, how he set his feet on a rock, and he makes his steps secure. He put a new song on my mouth, a song of praise to our God. And many around us will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in the Lord. Then verse 4 is one of the most important ones here. It says, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. That's true not just of David, not just of this situation, but of everyone. Blessed is every person, every man, every woman, every son, daughter, child, whatever, who puts their faith in God. If their faith is in God, they will be a blessed person for sure. Then it says later that it's not the sacrifices or the offerings that he did that made God happy, but what he wanted was a heart that was focused on doing the will of God. Verse 8 says, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. He talks to God here and says, your law is in my heart. And that's what you want. You want people who have the law of God in their heart. God wants people to serve him who are focused on him, not just doing whatever they want to do. Talks later about how his experience through all of this was hard, but how he puts his faith in the steadfast love of God and he relies on the mercy of God. I just think it's helpful to see this pattern in Psalm 38, 39, and 40 because so many of us want to run to Psalm 40 and say, I want the blessings of being forgiven. I want the blessings of God being with me. But the problem is a lot of times people skip over the ideas of Psalm 38 and 39 where there's this brokenhearted confessing of sin. Basically, for you, you cannot have God be for you. You cannot be on God's side unless you are already broken over your sin. You cannot come to God and think that God is just going to be for you and he's going to, say, oh, I love everything about your life. God's not going to do that unless you come and confess your sin and give up the stuff that God hates and start following him. So a lot of people get that mixed up. They want to go straight for Psalm 40 without experiencing the guilt and the shame over their sin of Psalm 38 and running to God in Psalm 39 and 40. So anyway, I think that should be a helpful reminder for all of us as we read that we need to feel the experience of guilt so that it leads us to put our hope in God. So that's our Old Testament reading today. In the New Testament, we are in Acts chapter 23. And as we're here, we already kind of got a little bit of a setup before that God told Paul that he was going to have to testify not just in front of the Jews, but also in front of the Gentiles. Now what we're going to see is this plot of the Jews to kill Paul as he's going to the Romans. In fact, it's funny, Paul's nephew finds out, which again, sometimes we forget, Paul had siblings, said this is his sister's son, so it's his nephew, finds out this plot, goes and tells Paul, goes and tells all these people, and the Romans take him away safely and get him to Felix, who's the governor of the area, and he's going to be in Caesarea. So he's going to go to Caesarea for a while at this point, and that's what you're going to read today. Basically, how does he get from Jerusalem to Caesarea? Because he's going to stay in Caesarea for a couple of years, actually, and that'll go fast in our reading. But the cool thing is God's control is not just in the spiritual things. Sometimes when we think about God being in control, all we think about is that he's in control of people's sin and guilt and how they feel and things on the spiritual level, but maybe not so much on the physical level. But the reality is God is just as in control over the physical world and the physical rulers and the Romans and the Jews and all of that, and over Paul's whole situation. He is just as sovereign over his circumstance, Paul's circumstance, as he is over anything else. So that should give us comfort that even in this life, and for you guys, as you think through the spiritual impact of Psalm 38, 39, and 40, just know that God is also sovereign over everything else in our lives, and you find that here in Acts chapter 23. So thanks for reading with us. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.